Welcome to ChamberChats, the Halifax Chamber's new podcast where we check in with the local business community, ask government the tough questions, and find ways to save your business money. For the foreseeable future, we're focusing on COVID-19 and the economic impact we're facing, along with available resources and tales of resiliency. Coming to you from Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to the new Halifax Chamber's podcast, ChamberChats. I'm Patrick Sullivan, President and CEO of the Halifax Chamber of Commerce and your host for today. ChamberChats is a new way to engage with our members and keep them up to date on the important things happening in our community and in and around Nova Scotia. And today we're talking to Scott Moffitt, the Executive Director of BioNova, the organization that leads Nova Scotia's health and life sciences sector. Scott is a senior management professional with over 20 years of life science experience in industry, government, and not-for-profit sectors. By leveraging his leadership and management abilities, Scott has built solid relationships and delivered significant results in each position he's held. Having returned to his home province a few years ago, Scott is now focused on making Nova Scotia a better place. Welcome, Scott, and thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Patrick. I'm really looking forward to being part of the podcast. Chamber Chats is a great idea.
Yeah, it is. I have a feeling it was a Saturday Night Live skit a few years ago, but I'm hoping that's not the case, Scott. So we'll stick with the name for a while. So it's certainly been a busy few months for you folks at BioNova and the life sciences industry as a whole as the pandemic started. It started quite a while ago, but as it reached, I suppose, our shores in February and then in March more fully, there's been significant changes right across the country and ultimately around the world. But let's talk about the term life sciences for a minute. Can you describe the sector a little bit for us and tell our listeners about the sector here in Halifax?
Sure. Life sciences is a pretty generic term. With typically that just references anything, any sort of the sciences that have to do with living things. But the sector here, the health and life sciences sector in Halifax and Nova Scotia, is predominantly made up of 5 different areas that we have specialization in. And that would be medical technologies. So, everything from an MRI machine to a hip implant to a Band-Aid is classified as a medical device. So there's a whole medical technology area that includes, in vitro diagnostic devices. So you go and get a throat swab, and all those things are, or in today's realm, you go and get the nasal swab for the COVID test, and the COVID test is a medical device, and so is the swab. Then we have pharmaceuticals and vaccines. So, classic therapeutics that are intended to treat disease, vaccines to hopefully prevent. We have natural health products, which are natural ingredients that have some sort of a medical benefit. And in Canada, those all need to be verified by Health Canada. And then we have digital health, which is that interplay between health-related issue and digital-related solution. So you can think of a complicated Fitbit that will monitor your cardiac rhythm and your output and your blood pressure and your blood glucose levels and things like that. Remote patient monitoring, those would all fall into that digital health category. And then the final one that we have here is around bioresources. So what are those high value components that we can get from a biological resource that we can then go through a value add step and sell those products? So for example, lobster shells, there are components within lobster shells that can feed into the general manufacturing industry or can go into pharmaceutical manufacturing. So there's all kinds of opportunities there around, the resources that we have. So that kind of breaks down what the sector looks like here in Halifax in terms of the areas. It's a very fast growing area and very exciting times. And certainly the whole COVID-19 experience has made that more prevalent than ever.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you and I talked in March, right after the provincial government was issuing calls for pandemic supplies and services and clearly BioNova and your industry answered that call. Can you tell us about those first few weeks in March and how BioNova played a role in getting some of that, some of those supplies, pandemic supplies, services, PPEs, or I suppose some of the other items that you would have talked about?
Yeah, certainly. The first thing that we tried to do was help in the immediate supply chain through the Nova Scotia Health Authority and the IWK, and that essentially meant us tapping into our networks of not only our members in Nova Scotia. So we asked all members in Nova Scotia to evaluate what their PPE needs would be, and what could they supply to the health authorities. The second phase of that, in the early days, was reaching out to contacts at a national level. So some of those larger companies and suppliers to try and get those folks into the supply chain within the health authorities. Because, they obviously the health authority wasn't working with every company out there. And we just simply tried to fill that gap through our network so that they could find supplies from other companies.
Right. Wow. So how many? Was it a kind of a direct relationship where you said, I don't know, and I'm thinking of some of the big health providers that are in Ontario and then may come out of the United States. Did you link them up with those groups because you knew them, or was it that you were helping to actually develop some of that equipment?
Yeah, in the very early days, it was just the direct linkages with specific companies that had availability or could manufacture, or I'm talking things like procedural masks and N95s and gowns and some of those things that they needed immediately, face shields. So that was just a direct connection to the company. And then that was the initial phase. And then from then on, then we started looking at using our networks with MedTech Canada and Innovative Medicines Canada to see what they could do to supply the supply chain as well. Because it wasn't only the PPE, that was related to COVID-19, but there was still the regular healthcare system to manage. And obviously, in such a time of change, there were a lot of challenges there getting, regular everyday products as well.
Yeah. Are we out of the woods yet in Nova Scotia? Did Nova Scotia experience any large shortages? How does that compare to other provinces?
Yeah, certainly we did. We were very fortunate in the sense that we didn't have a large number of cases. When you look at Quebec and Ontario, they're in a bit of a different situation. So locally, we were able to, scurry around and find the necessary supplies to build those stockpiles up before something hit. The biggest deficit area would have been around ventilators, just because of the complexity of manufacturing and approvals and so on. The only real short-term solution for that was to ramp up production from companies like Medtronic and ResMed. So that we are very fortunate that we didn't get a large number of cases, because we would have been in a very difficult situation very quickly. If memory serves, we only had 250 or 300 ventilators in the entire province. So one person, one ventilator, you get more than that, and people are going to have a more difficult outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, are we out of the woods? Or will the shortages continue? And do you think we're prepared for a potential second wave at some point in the future?
We're much better prepared for a second wave than the first wave. Stockpiles are there, orders for ventilators and those kinds of things were placed. So we're in a better situation. But the most critical thing is going to be limiting spread, of round two. The prediction is September. So we are just going to have to be very diligent so that we don't need those. The best solution here is prevention overall. So we are in a better situation, but if things go sideways really bad, then we're going to be in a world of hurt relatively quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you've got members who are already in clinical trials like IMV or Apili that are working on clinical trials for treatments for COVID-19. we know that IMD is scheduled to begin human trials this summer here in Halifax for a vaccine they're developing. Can you walk us through the process of creating a vaccine?
Sure. I'll try and give you the simplified version, the non-PhD version, if you will. Um, so the biggest thing with vaccine is obviously it's meant to be a preventative. And what a vaccine typically does is take advantage of your own immune system to build up immunity. So what needs to happen for that to take place is the vaccine that's under development needs to figure out what is the target. Is that going to be, a surface protein that's on the virus? Is that going to be part of the DNA or the RNA or some component of the virus? So once they pick a target, then they will go down the road and figure out research and development to build this vaccine. They'll test in the lab. And when they start and see positive results in the lab, they will then have a potential candidate. That candidate vaccine will then go through a number of checks and balances to make sure that number one, it's safe, and number two, it's efficacious. It's going to do what it's supposed to do. So at the first, it's called preclinical work. Basically, you take the vaccine candidate and you use mouse models to make sure that the vaccine is safe. Once that data, and you can also test to see whether or not it works to a degree. If that stuff all goes really well, you will go into like a first in human or a phase 1 clinical trial. And you take a very small subset of people and again, test for safety. And they'll do some monitoring to see whether or not it's working, but the primary need to do that is safety. Phase 2, you'll get a larger population, a larger number of people. Again, you're going to test for safety and efficacy, make sure it's working. And if that data looks really good, then you're going to go to a much larger trial. Could be thousands of people, depending on the situation. And what that is intended to do is, again, verify the safety, but really check out the population to see how well the so once it goes through that chain, then you've got to get regulatory approval. That would come directly from Health Canada. And then it can actually be set up to be manufactured. So then you would have to figure out your manufacturing plans and then figure out what you're going to do to distribute and monitor that vaccine after it hits the marketplace. Because long-term monitoring is one of the requirements from a Health Canada perspective. So it's quite a complex procedure. It takes a fair amount of time, and it certainly takes an incredibly large amount of money. So you'll see, today, that's why a lot of vaccines that were being produced for the Ebola virus or something else, that's why those are being looked at to be repurposed, because obviously a lot of that work has been done already. So it's a fairly complex process to make a vaccine.
So, and obviously time, it takes considerable time to do this. This doesn't sound like something that's going to be done next month. So I guess the idea of having a vaccine in the next few months is probably a little too optimistic. I mean, is this a next year thing or a year after that thing, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think, in the next few months, not going to happen. Realistically, we're looking at, being super optimistic, 12 to 18 months, probably 18 months, or potentially a little bit more. But I think, the most common number being thrown around right now is 18 months.
Right. Well, but I do think, and we talked a moment ago about, second wave. The fact that we're executing this physical distancing now, and did manage to flatten the curve and all of those kinds of things, would leave me optimistic that we're not going to need mass vaccines in a really quick period of time, as great as that would be. But we need to maintain the physical distancing and all of the things that we're doing. Just to jump ahead, and you kind of mentioned this. I mean, you mentioned ventilators. You had a team, the Skunkworks team, which was a group that came together to support companies that had solutions to support healthcare in Nova Scotia during COVID-19. One of the projects was a ventilator project with Protocase, Ingenuity, Advanced Glazings, and Nova Scotia Power's marker or makerspace, I guess. Can you tell us about that? How did the group get started, and where's that project now?
Yeah, certainly. The Skunkworks team, to use that term from World War II, the intent of that was there were a bunch of companies and individuals that wanted to do something and had everything from design capabilities to manufacturing capabilities to engineering capabilities. And they all wanted to do something. So under the banner of Ingenuity, who have acted as the herder of the cats or kind of that the leadership around that, basically coalesced that group, of which we were a part. Alcoa is a part, the province is a part, various companies, Nova Scotia Health Authority, the IWK. So in the very, very early days, we were throwing around ideas of, what can we make? And that morphed into how do we very quickly be able to respond to the identified needs of the Nova Scotia Health Authority and the IWK. So that meant that that group then started working on local gown production, surgical mask production, N95 production. What can we do in terms of testing and swabs? How do we pivot with a CPAP device for a potential ventilator application? Can we actually build and manufacture a ventilator here? So, hand sanitizer production. So that group started looking at those areas, trying to figure out who can do what are the regulatory challenges that we need to overcome? Do we need to build supply chains? Do we need to build local long-term manufacturing capabilities? So that group jumped on that. And so now there are, gowns being produced in Nova Scotia. BioNova, as part of that team, did the regulatory reviews for, BBI Group, for Mackenzie Atlantic, for United Sign, reviewed the Stanfield's application, and there's others. So it really brought together a group with some expertise to be able to very quickly respond to the urgent needs of healthcare. And so today, that group is continuing, looking a little bit more long-term at this point to see what we can do to set up local manufacturing, what is feasible, what is realistic, so that we don't end up in this situation again. The shortages around N95s, that has really created a large issue. Not only that we can't buy any, we can't even buy the materials to make them. So there's going to have to be some alternate solutions put around that. And that's what this group is doing now.
Right. Oh, that's great. That's great. So they have other projects, obviously, more than just the ventilator that they're working on.
Yes, absolutely. The ventilators is just one part. The gown manufacturing is going to continue. Face shield is going to continue. Looking at the potential to manufacture swabs, because there is a national and a global shortage around those nasal swabs for doing testing.
Right. Wow. So, as part of the testing, one of the companies, Sona Nanotech, was submitted the fastest COVID-19 test kit to Health Canada. Was this? I don't suppose they were working on a test kit for COVID-19 a year ago. But was this part of their usual business model, or did they see an opportunity to kind of jump in and get to work quickly using the materials they had at hand?
Yeah, this really speaks to the capabilities of platform technologies. That the product that they had was simply pivoted over towards, what's the problem today, and that's COVID-19. And so they were in a very fortunate situation where they had an awesome platform technology. Now we have a new problem. Let's just pivot over and start looking at that. And it worked out extremely well. So Sona Nanotech has done an incredible job, with that detection kit.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. That's amazing. So you probably know, I think the Halifax Chamber is leading the Nova Scotia Business and Labor Economic Coalition, which we affectionately refer to as NS Black, to be the first point of contact with government through this pandemic and to get information to the business community as soon as possible. Our greatest strength with this group, because there's over 200 people, we're doing over 100 people on a call, is collaboration. And we're really seeing that in the life sciences sector with the ventilator, with spring-loaded technology. Chris recently joined our board, actually, from spring-loaded. Ring Rescue Ingenuity's work on their face shields and other PPE. Is this level of collaboration typical in the life sciences sector? And do you hope to see more of these kinds of projects once the pandemic passes?
Yes, it is. And first and foremost, the Nova Scotia Business and Labor Economic Coalition that you've organized from the Chamber has been a very important piece of information, an easy way to get a hold of government officials and a great conduit. So, you should be congratulated on that. It's been a wonderful tool, and I'm obviously part of those calls. But from the collaboration perspective, absolutely. We have a great sector, and we're fortunate in that we do not have any two companies that are in a competitive situation. So, they all have to go through the same regulatory hurdles and the paths to market and things like that. So that the companies tend to talk to each other a fair bit, collaborate, coordinate, share information. So the collaboration aspect has been there for, quite some time. I think another part of that is that there's a slightly higher or an increased willingness to help, because most of these companies are involved in the health sector, and their primary goal is to improve patient outcomes. So if there are things that they can do to accentuate that activity, then they tend to do it. I mean, a lot of companies are started by founders that run into a medical challenge that they can't solve with whatever is existing. So they come up with these solutions on their own. And I think it's absolutely critical for this collaboration to continue. We all understand that the silo model does not work very well. So this collaboration piece has to continue if we are going to capitalize on efficiency. We can't all be trying to do the same thing. We all need to share information. So collaboration is critical, not only around COVID-19, but, and not only just for our sector, but for the future of Nova Scotia in general.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up. I was speaking to Mahmoud of Solid State Pharma. Now, this was a few months ago. I remember I went down, toured his facility. I'm sure they're a member. They're a member, Solid State Pharma, and toured their facility. It was an amazing facility. We went to lunch back when you could go to lunch with people, he was saying that the opportunity for life sciences in Nova Scotia is so significant with the universities, with the support of government. And obviously with the collaboration you're talking about, to grow. Maybe I'm asking a biased question for you, but do you feel there's a real opportunity for life sciences to grow in Nova Scotia?
Absolutely. And, Mahmoud is absolutely correct as well. Yeah. And, Solid State Pharma, they're a member of BioNova, and Mahmoud's actually one of my directors on the board. When you start and look at the landscape that we have in Nova Scotia and evaluate all the resources, from capital infrastructure, you've got Dalhousie, you've got a medical school, you've got 2 teaching hospitals, you've got a pediatric hospital system and an adult hospital system. You've got research capabilities from the NRC. You've got great support in this part of the world with the combination of NRC IRAP and ACOA. So we have a great opportunity here. The amount of research that's being done at Dal in this sector accounts for about 75% of the total research being done. So we have an incredible opportunity. And actually, BioNova has issued recently an economic development plan for the sector over the next few years, where called BioFuture 2030, where we want to see the number of companies double, exports triple, employment triple, and bring our income levels up to be a little bit more on par with the national averages. So we see great opportunities for this area. That's very well recognized when companies go abroad, and it's also well recognized by individuals when they come here. And even if you've been tracking the levels of investment in our sector, we were leading, Nova Scotia over the last 5 years is our sector in terms of the amount of investment attracted. So we see great possibilities. Especially folks that are working in this sector. The average income in our sector is around $65,000-$66,000, which is significantly above the provincial average. So it's a high value sector, and we're producing great products that are going to benefit patients and Nova Scotians.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's amazing. And obviously that confirms what Mahmoud mentioned to me just a few short months ago. And I must admit, I was so impressed. Next time I saw a couple of the folks from government, I talked about the innovation area downtown and Volta, which is a little more focused on the technology side, but wondered out loud with the government folks, why there wasn't a greater focus on life sciences. And maybe I think what I'm hearing from you is maybe I'm just unaware, and maybe many of our listeners are unaware of the focus that's already there for life sciences in Nova Scotia.
Yeah, there is great focus. Certainly the federal government has been very supportive, and BioNova as an organization, even before my time, is doing a lot of work to focus on the sector. Certainly from the provincial perspective, we've been put back on the map as a priority sector area for the province. But I think that there is more that we can do from a provincial aspect to make sure that we are. And this goes back to the Ivany report, to make sure that we are getting research out of universities and make sure that it's being commercialized. I mean, that's one of the major areas of the Ivany report that is not working very well. So I think we can certainly continue to shine the light on it. And frankly, a bit of a bright side from the COVID-19 experience is I think it's very clearly demonstrated the value that this sector can bring, not only to the province, but to patients and everyday Nova Scotians and Canadians.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're now at the point where we're seeing no new cases in many provinces in the Maritimes. Let's hope that continues. But what's BioNova's next focus for the coming months, or do you have another focus, or will it be to continue with slightly more focus, I suppose, on health than maybe there was in the past? But what is the next focus for BioNova?
Yeah, for us, obviously, we're going to keep involved with the Skunkworks activity, but that's going to, as other supply chains get corrected and so on, I think that's going to become less and less of an issue. Our main focus right now is to, get back to our core function. Now that has been skewed a little bit in light of COVID-19. So right now we are pivoting a little bit in terms of our programming to be able to focus on recovery and restart programs. Obviously a lot of companies that weren't focused on COVID-19, have been kind of, just moving along, but we're in a situation now where those companies need to get back to normal quickly. So we're coming up with a bunch of new programs, coaching and mentoring programs, early stage R&D programs, programs so that companies can now operate in the new normal, which is going to be virtual. So what kind of tools do they need in terms of electronic formats? We're even looking at secure electronic platforms where companies can meet and talk and transfer information around the world, but still be, safe from an electronics perspective, things that are PIPEDA compliant and things like that. So right now we are totally pivoting towards the recovery, again, under the banner of BioFuture 2030, to make sure that we're going to meet those goals down the road.
Wow, that's great. Well, thanks, Scott. Thank you very much for jumping on the podcast today. I think my favorite part of the job is learning about all the amazing things happening in Halifax. And obviously, life sciences is certainly deserving of the spotlight right now. So let's keep those conversations going, and we'll check in with you later this year to see how the sector continues to thrive. So thank you very much, Scott, for joining me today. And thanks to, sorry, I'll let you say something there, Scott. You took a breath. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was just going to say thank you, Patrick. This has been great.
That's great. We'll appreciate it. And thank you very much, everyone. And bye-bye from the Halifax Chamber.
Tune in next time at halifaxchamber.com/podcast. The Halifax Chamber is in your corner.